Hi again then guys, and welcome to the very first individual car review from the new batch of 8 vehicles in the 1.32 patch, and what better place to start than with the car that most people either have not bought yet or are unsure whether or not they should, because when it comes to this kind of pricing, these high rollers as we call them here on the channel, they are cars which certainly have a lot of merit historically, and they were great in their time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll still like them now, that they'll still be useful now, and when it's such a competitive market within the high rollers category, with some that are more handling based, like the Alfa Romeo TZ2, some which are very good all-rounders, like the Daytona Cobra, and others which are just the peak of their field, like the XJ13 or the Ferrari P4. Which ones should you go for, or should you just get them all? Are they good for different things? Well, of course, to some degree that is true, the latter. In the case of this one though, it's a fresh new car for this kind of category, the Aston Martin DB3S. As I said in my overarching breakdown for the new update, it's really cool to see how much more love Aston Martin is getting as a brand in this game compared to the past of the franchise. Because ever since Gran Turismo 4 onward, the Aston Martin lineup was pretty stagnant. We had the same kind of cars every time, and the only new one that was brought in was basically the 177, as far as the really significant stuff. There was the Vantage as well, but even then they were all kind of similar. The DB9, the old school supercharged Vantage, the newer Vantage, they all had similar performance, similar specs, even similar pricing for the most part, so to have something like this one, or like the new Group 3 Aston Vantage race car, or the Group 4, it's cool to see them branching out into all of these different things, so that those who do love the brand can represent them pretty well. In fact, all that we don't have now is kind of a rally car, and apart from that, they've got most of the other bases covered. Now, as far as this one goes, it's 10 million credits, which is basically what I predicted. I said it would either be 10 million or 20. It is 10, and I think that's pretty good, because for those who do want it, you've literally got half the amount of work. That's a huge difference. You can get it in half the time, compared to something like an XJ13 or a P4. Now, half the price could mean half the ability, so how good is it? Well, here at Le Mans, as an example, it was actually quicker than my Ferrari 250 GTO, which is double the price, and it was faster than the Alfa TZ2, which is the same price. So in terms of ability, straight off the bat for lap times, it's actually really good. And the best part, and this is the part that shocked me the most, it's only about 3 seconds, or 2 or 3 seconds I think it was, slower than my personal favourite of all of the high rollers, the Daytona Cobra, which, if I recall correctly, is 15 million. So again, it compares really well. And it's a lot faster than you'd think. It doesn't look that fast in comparison to the others. It looks very kind of rickety. Everything's very skinny, it's very tall, there's a lot of air getting in the wheel wells. It doesn't exactly look like the quickest thing out there. Whereas something like a Daytona Cobra or the Alfa TZ2, they look very sleek, very low, very purposeful. And of course the prototypes like the P4 definitely do. This one looks its age. It looks like a relic, but it actually performs really well. Now, the engine is a 2.9 litre. It's got, interestingly, the exact same amount of power and torque in its stock form, 224 horsepower, 224 pound-feet, which again does not sound that impressive. It's basically the second least powerful of these cars, second only to the TZ2, but it doesn't have the extreme weight advantage that the TZ2 has. It's light, but it's not that light. This one weighs 856 kilos, but of course that does mean that the horsepower per tonne is a respectable 262 straight out of the crate. Now, as far as how it performs, how it handles, we already talked about lap times. In a straight line, this one that I'm driving here, I bumped up the power, but I didn't upgrade it. So it's running like, I don't know, 105% power, 110, something like that, but with no actual power upgrades. And even with that, still limited amount of power, it's got like 260 horsepower or something, it can hit around 190 miles per hour. That's very impressive. Even for one of these classic race cars, that's a very, very good level of performance to be working with. Now, where it can be a bit trickier is the cornering. And that's not too surprising. It's got a higher centre of gravity with the higher ride height. The body itself is narrower, so it's not quite as squat to the road as a TZ2. And it doesn't really have that kind of prototype or GT car shape. that many of the others had, because this is older than many of those. And it's also a lot slower. So of course you're not going to expect it to put in the lap time of an XJ13 anytime soon, so the question is, should you buy this one? Well, I would say yes, for the most part. I wouldn't say this is a 50-50, I would actually say this is more like a 60-40 in favour of yes, because it is new, it is completely different to all of the other high rollers, it is very competitive for its power, it's a great foil to stuff like the 250 GTO and the Alfa Romeo, but the 40% is because there are some people who just will not like the handling on this car. It wallows around a lot, it's very bumpy, very twitchy, very, as I said, rickety. It feels like driving an old wooden sled, which is essentially what they feel like, because that's authentic to the car's era. It's extremely primitive by today's technology, and it makes the other classics look like rocket science in comparison, but it has a lot of charm. This car really does have a lot of charm. It's hugely fun to drive. I think it sounds really good as well. The cockpit view is great. You've got the big dials, that huge wooden steering wheel. It looks like it should be on a boat. Really open view of everything, which I personally love. That's one of the reasons why I love speedsters so much, with a really small windshield. You can see everything that's going on. So visibility is fantastic, and it's got great collector's appeal, because unlike all of the others, it's not just a returning face, it's completely new to the game. So overall, my thoughts on the DB3S are actually that I'm very happy with it. I wasn't, 100% certain that it was going to be that car from the silhouette, but I thought much more likely than not it probably was, and that did turn out to be the case. It is the GT Award winner, so it has a special place in the history of Gran Turismo now, and I think it's an interesting choice to add to the game. Not the most obvious of choices, even for an Aston. There are plenty of other Astons which would probably come to mind first, even in the road world. Stuff like a Lagonda, even, or a DB5, which of course is also iconic in its own way. And as far as classics go, you could make much more of an argument for a DBR1 rather than a DBR3 or a DB3S in this case. So overall, I think it's a cool choice, certainly a bit more oddball looking than some of the other classic high rollers, but one which is, I would say, worth your time. Don't go after this one expecting it to be the best, even for the price, because I would recommend just saving up the extra 5 mil and getting the Daytona Cobra. But if you do want to try one of these slower ones, the less power, or less powerful ones, lower powered, it's an interesting one to go for. But that's it for this review overall. Of course, I will see you next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.